Is that okay?
I think I figured I'd have to change that.
Switches over here where there's also a handheld. Looks like it's, yeah. So Bob, you know what, when I started posting on Facebook promoting this event, people started wondering whether did the Prime Minister's office perhaps tell you to write this book? Is this basically meant as a smokescreen from conservative troubles?
So it's interesting you asked that question. I decided to write this book 4 years ago. I was at the Shaughnessy Cohen night where they award the best political book of the year. And it went to John English for his second volume on Pierre Trudeau. Not only did it glorify Pierre Trudeau, it did not in any way hold him account for any of his failings or any of his record. And I think here's a book, and it's not the first to win an award. 2 years earlier, a book on Trudeau won. So this is a succession of flattering biographies. I thought, this is what people are going to know about Trudeau. This is the next generation is going to know about Trudeau. Lawrence Martin, who is no great fan of conservatism, tapped me on the shoulder and said, enough's enough. You got to write, you're the guy who can clear the record and write the truth about Pierre Trudeau, and it needs to be done. And he's a great defender of Pierre Trudeau. He said it was time for the other side. You ask if I was put up with this by conservatives. I've never even met Stephen Harper. I've never even shaken his hand. In my view, you can call me fiscal conservative. I ran 25 years ago with the Progressive Conservative Party in its riding. I'm a conservative because I think conservatism generally works, but I'm not an idealist.
Are you saying you're not a wheeler dealer in the Conservative Party?
Well, obviously, the Conservative Party thinks so much of me that since 2006, I've not done one piece of work for either the Conservative Party in Canada or even the federal government. I write op-eds, I do consulting work, I have no direct connection.
Well, look, I get that all the time, but us being a mouthpiece for the Conservative Party of Canada.
Well, I get criticized from conservatives. When I criticize Stephen Harper or Jim Flaherty on some of their budgets, for not fully addressing our economic challenges, trust me, I get it in the ear from conservatives for being critical.
I believe it. So tell me, how many people did you interview for this book, and what liberals did you talk to?
Well, there's probably close to 100, formally and informally, that I interviewed for this book. One liberal comes to mind, John Turner, former Prime Minister of Canada, who gave me his views on Pierre Trudeau. I wouldn't call him a conservative, but Derek Burney worked for Pierre Trudeau. He was his Sherpa for the G7, worked up close with him, and saw what other leaders had to say about him. I extensive interviews with a number of environmentalists, like Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party, who gave her views on Trudeau. I was ready, willing, open, and invited all manner of people from all walks of life to give me the defense of Pierre Trudeau's record. And of course, I had read every biography, every bit that was produced by liberals on Pierre Trudeau.
I was interested in reading some of the quotes in your book from Alan Gottlieb, who was our ambassador to the U.S. I mean, his diary is an amazing book. And he was from time to time, pretty flabbergasted and upset with what was going on in Ottawa. But although he was also upset with Joe Clark, occasionally too, and what was going on when Mulroney was Prime Minister. But did you talk to Alan Gottlieb?
No, I rely extensively on his biography and his other writings in press reportings, because it was a very detailed biography. Yeah. His view was that Canadian foreign policy was no longer grounded in Canadian interests. That foreign policy in Canada was based on the personal will, whim, and fancy of Pierre Trudeau, as it happened to be at that day. Pierre Trudeau used to say he didn't even need the Department of Foreign Affairs to tell him what should be done for Canada, because the Department of Foreign Affairs, first and foremost, was there to promote and protect Canadian interests. Pierre Trudeau said all he ever needed to learn about international relations he could read from the New York Times.
Well, they have a lot in common. Some people said, look, you've written a very good book, but you've taken everything out of context. You know, it was a tough time. You know, inflation was big in the States. Interest rates were 18, 20% under Volcker. You know, it was a really horrible time, and you've taken this all out of context in the Times.
So I've made this the the top 10 worst parts of Trudeau, and I've kind of left out everything else. That's kind of the storyline as people who try to undermine the book. There are 900 footnotes in this book. There's nothing in this book that's not referenced to a source document. I'm probably the only Canadian alive who's read every single federal budget from 1968 to 1984, all of them, to look for what was done, what was said. The data that's in this book is from those partisan organizations: Statistics Canada, Finance Canada, Department of Foreign Affairs. This is solidly an evidence-based book. It's not an ideological book. It's not a rant. This is what he did, and this was the results. In terms of context, I mean, I've tried to give you some example of this tonight. You know, when I look at the debt level under Canada, I compare it with our major trading partners. Spending in Canada, it didn't go from 17% of GDP to 24%. Just stop it for a second. When Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister, basically he touched 17 out of every $100 that was transacted in the country. He went from 17 to 24. I compare that with all the other nations to say, well, was everyone else this eager for big government? Certainly, there was inflation in other countries. There was a ramp up in spending. You know, even Richard Nixon once famously said, well, we're all Keynesian now. But Pierre Trudeau was the biggest of them all. It was that Canada performed so much more poorly. John Kenneth Galbraith, you know, who was this great economist advisor to the Kennedys, who served as ambassador to India, who advised American presidents, said that he knew of no leader in the world. Let's put this in context. So, John Kenneth Galbraith, putting this in context, he knew no leader in the world that was more prone to government intervention, social intervention, using the government as a force, again, call it good, in the whole world than Pierre Trudeau. How about that for context?
I'll take that. Now, you said, I heard from you that basically last week you had a book launch and somebody from Justin Trudeau's office came and bought a book. So tell us about that, and what should Justin know about his father?
Well, actually, I think if there's one person in the country who benefits from this book, who could potentially benefit from this book more than anyone else, it's Justin Trudeau. Let me tell you why. I think for all of his, how old is he now? He's 40. For all of his 40 years, like people have been telling him how great his dad was, how great his record was. And he might be otherwise inclined to defend that record and to try to follow it and to try to build on it. And I think if anyone needs to know the truth about the record of Pierre Trudeau, it's his son. If I were Justin Trudeau, I would not stand on this record. It's an abysmal record. Politically, well, other than in Quebec, Pierre Trudeau was a big success in Quebec, but outside of Quebec, it was not a big winning record. I wouldn't count on building on that political record. And in Quebec, the Trudeau name is very controversial. I mean, a couple of Anglophone ridings in Montreal, he'll do okay, but other than that, he doesn't hold a lot of favor. Pierre Trudeau does in Quebec. I think Justin Trudeau needs to stand on his own 2 feet. He needs to. I would not mention, if I were Justin Trudeau, his father's name, not even once, except to the extent that he disagrees with him. And he can show how he's different than his father. I think he did himself an enormous amount of good when he responded at a town hall meeting in Prescott and Russell, when he said the long gone registry was a waste, it was ineffective. I started paying attention to it. I wondered what was he going to say next. But for the most part, you know, he's sort of followed onto the celebrity format, and you know, we haven't really seen where he stands on policy. But how refreshing would it be for him to say, you know what? My dad had it wrong. He spent too much money. He borrowed too much money. It was bad for trade. He undermined our alliances. On this, I don't think there can be much dispute. Wouldn't that really capture the attention of Canadians if he did that? So I think everybody in his office should have a copy.
And his brother too.
I'm not making any wagers on whether that's going to happen.
Well, you don't think they're going to give you a call for a lunch?
They offer.
No.
I don't.
Okay, look, we've got 2 microphones here. If anybody wants to ask Bob a question, please line up and we'll take some questions before we go out for, line up with the microphone, please, Robert.
I frantically skimmed